and moves were made. Hands were shook, money exchanged hands, possibly drugs. But it was all good. It was all in the name of fantasy football.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dynasty. Like I said, we all see things differently.
Put it on his shirt. I
Yes,
just
they do.
drank what tasted like a root beer, but now I'm feeling kind of tipsy.
Ride that unicorn, my friend.
I was really going to do an awful Mexican accent, but I realized how mad I'd be at someone else for doing that. So, hi.
We all are very intrigued and very interested in what will happen this year.
Happy Thursday, everybody. It's officially week 3 in the NFL. It's 10 a.m. on the dot. This is Peter Livingston. You are listening to the Dynasty podcast. It is a seasonal fantasy football podcast in which 12 friends enter, one leaves champion. Week 2 was in the books. We had our recap video happen yesterday. Or not video, podcast. That's up. You can check that out if you need to. We're looking on to week 3. At the end of week 2, just another quick recap. First place, we have Robin Fartapocalypse at 2-0. Second place, top of the Bad Sports Fund division, we have Matt Hughes of Golden Tate Warriors, also at 2-0. Top of the Roger Goodell division. In third place, also at 2-0, Tahir the Teabaggers, followed by Joe in fourth place, also at 2-0. Fifth place, Elliot, our commissioner, 1-1. Sixth place, Tim, also at 1-1, followed by Matt Keyser with a 1-1 record. And a bunch of people at 0-2. Pat is also 1-1 in 8th place, but he will be competing for that final 12th place spot by the end of the year. Brienne, Marcos, myself, and Scott all at 0-2, rounding out the bottom 4. Very interesting week last week. If you want to listen to it or you missed it, go back, check it out. Time for us to look into week 3. So we'll go through some of the news and notes that have happened and transpired since this past week. It looks like Sam Bradford is practicing today, which is going to be something to watch if you have a piece of the Minnesota offense. Amazing week 1, week 2. In his absence, they struggled a little bit. Granted, they haven't had the easiest of matchups, but they're going to need him back. So watching that, I think anybody with a piece of the Minnesota offense, hoping Sam Bradford gets back soon. Prescott seems to be fine. He had a ankle injury last week, but I think he's going to be okay. Rob Gronkowski seems to be practicing. Coming from the Packers, though, that doesn't mean much. Odell Beckham, of course, is practicing. And don't really know where he's at percentage-wise. But one of the interesting things to note is that it sounds like their O coordinator may be calling the plays now in New York. So that's going to be very, very interesting. It just hasn't been, things have not been going to plan this season. And so they're looking to shake some things up. And I'm kind of excited to see what happens there. Tyler Eifert, of course, knee and back, absent from practice. That can't be good. And then Jay Ajayi is not dealing with any serious injury, and neither is Jarvis Landry. So, with that all said and done, let's go ahead and look at some of the transactions that took place. I believe the line for our waiver wire was set for, I can't remember. I think Elliot said 1.5, and I think I said 3.5. And it was just under. We had 3. No, we didn't. Excuse me. We didn't have any waivers this past week. We had a lot of transactions, though. So, looking at this past in week 2 after week 1, a lot of waiver wire action going down this week. Obviously, None. So, but a lot of free agents were picked up. Looking at some of the more significant ones, a couple drops. Orleans Darkwa picked up by Pat, and probably not a bad decision considering the fact that the New York Football Giants and their backfield, right now it's anybody's game. And part of that is the fact that the offense has been so bad. I think another part of that is the offensive line is so bad. And also I think part of it is the fact that Eli Manning hasn't been that good. So it's really hard when all of that is working against you for a running back to really emerge. And I think you're in for a little bit of running back roulette in the state of New York. But actually what I need to do is I need to go through the Fart Apocalypse. Robin did his report card for the waiver wire free agency. So he'll go ahead and start with Jack Doyle. I picked up Jack Doyle, dropped Jared Cook. B+. Lots of chemistry with that guy playing QB in Indy. Then he underlined the time of the transaction, 12:06 a.m., the no pants hour, as he calls it. Very true. Next transaction, we had Deontay Foreman, picked up Jamal Williams, dropped B+. Good stash. Miller has looked bad, but that offense is doo-doo. I do agree with that. The offense is a little bit better than last year, but that's not saying much. Definitely hoping for it to improve. He also underlined the transaction time at 12:07 a.m., and he said, Padro up late. That was me making that. I was up late. I was editing and trying to upload the podcast that we had recorded, and I was doing some prep work, actually, for week 3. I had no waiver claims in, obviously, and was just trying to look and see who was out there, and saw that I was able to pick up players. So I did. A team has no name. Pat has a trio of transactions, actually. Picks up Rashard Higgins, a Cleveland wide receiver, drops Kerwin Williams, the Arizona running back. B, so many Pat moves. Hard to get excited about Cleveland wide receiver, but someone has to catch balls out there. And then he has an arrow pointing to Kerwin Williams and says, who names their kid Kerwin? Which is a very valid point. This one happened at 12:13 a.m. It was underlined, but there was no note on that. So, yeah, Rashard Higgins activated off the practice squad, came in, had a fairly good game, and that's somebody that I liked, but the fact of the matter is my biggest concerns are running back and tight end, and so I didn't really have room on my roster to go and get Rashard Higgins, as much as I like him. But it's a good pickup, I agree. The next transaction was 41 minutes later. Jermaine Kearse picked up Orleans Darkwa, dropped. So I retract everything I said about Orleans Darkwa. Wanted to get a piece of that. Jermaine Kearse, this was a C grade, worth a grab after a big game. Jermaine Kearse was the big body receiver out of Seattle that recently moved over to the New York Jets. And I actually always liked him. When he was in Seattle, he was used mainly as a big blocking wide receiver, but he also had some really good playmaking ability. And this 2-touchdown game was certainly interesting, but especially with a lot of the predictions for wide receivers coming out of New York. Maybe it's Jermaine Kearse. Maybe he could be the go-to guy. So good pickup by Pat. And then he went with Evan Ingram and dropped Dwayne Washington. B+ was a grade. Big upside. That offense has to rebound, right? I agree. Green Bay defense was next picked up by the Golden Tate Warriors at 1:10 a.m. Man, you guys are up late. C-, probably okay this week. Plenty of sacks to be had on that O-line. And then Joe, with the next pick, went and snagged Matthew Stafford and dropped Kirk Cousins. D+, wow, despite the bad start, I still think Cousins over Stafford. And then he crossed out Joe's name and said Shart Tsunami. So maybe we should call Joe Shart Tsunami from here on out. I'm hoping that there's a story behind that. But that is interesting. You know, Matt Stafford, the Detroit offense has looked really, really good. Their whole team has looked really solid. And I've been a big champion of Matt Stafford the past few years. I've even drafted him, and I think he was my quarterback last year, and he did fine. Kirk Cousins has been struggling. There's a lot of speculation going on, some of which is borderline, I don't want to say crazy talk, but it does start to get into conspiracy that the front office is trying to sabotage his last year, possibly get him injured with the dealings and moves that they've made. And there's a part of me that wouldn't. The sad thing is that it's believable when you're talking about the Washington front office, and that's a little sad, I think. But you also have to think that they want to have a good product out there, and that they want to compete, and that they will find a way to get this offense back on track, because they have some of the pieces, and I think that they do have some very good talent. Offensive line is okay. There's something not right there. I know that they've lost Shanahan, and they've lost the O coordinator to McVay. They lost him to LA. But this is just really weird. And I do think that there's a point where Kirk Cousins does turn it around and is able to bring it back. But Matthew Stafford has just looked so good, and Detroit has looked so good, that you have to think that I don't know if there are 12 quarterbacks right now better than Matthew Stafford. And because of that, I think he should be rostered, and he probably should be starting for one of these teams. So I do think Shart Tsunami, that was a good pickup. Next, at 6:24 a.m., the Golden Tate Warriors pick up the Pittsburgh defense and drop the Green Bay defense. And Robin had an arrow pointing to the time and said was pooping, which is probably fairly accurate. I am curious, went with Green Bay. Definitely saw something there with the Green Bay defense and their matchup. And then going to Pittsburgh, who has had quite a good year thus far. 18 points in week 1, 8 points, very solid against Minnesota in week 2. They do have Chicago and then Baltimore. I understand the Chicago matchup. That definitely makes a lot of sense. Green Bay, pretty good week 1. 9 points against Seattle, was at home. On the road, only 2 points. But then Cincinnati at home. I get the enticing Pittsburgh matchup, but Cincinnati hasn't looked all that hot either. And it would be at home. Pittsburgh on the road. Let's see what Robin has to say. Robin gives it a B. I like Pitt. Defense is looking solid. I think it's good. I would say C+ or B-. Not that I'm doing the grading. This is Robin's grading, not Pete's grading. Shut up and move on. The next 6:45, Nate Silver-Sith picks up Austin Seferian-Jenkins and drops Carson Palmer. I knew this was coming. This man loves him. Some ASJ. C+ grade. Carson goes nuts this week because Elliott, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Bold move. I like it. And then finally at 6:47 in the AM, Nate Silver Sith picks up Marquise Lee and drops Tampa Bay. C, didn't this happen last week too? Backup plan for when he trades Krabs to me. Ouch. Marquise Lee, of course, he was the guy last year, and then is fighting to be that number one guy this year. You could argue that he is the number one guy right now with the injuries that they've had at wide receiver, Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns and everybody else. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Jacksonville. I think it's a pickup that had to be made. And then we had a couple other pickups and drops. Chris Boswell, Pat picked him up, the Pittsburgh kicker, who's actually looked pretty good this year. He dropped Phil Dawson, the Arizona kicker. Chris Boswell had a monster 16-point game last week. And then Phil Dawson, he's been, above pedestrian, 5 points and 11 points. So not too bad. And then the Detroit defense was picked up by Scott at 11 a.m., and he dropped the New England defense. So the New England defense they had their slow start, but notoriously a very good real-life defense. Not always the best fantasy. And Detroit has scored 16 and 17 points, respectively, against a pretty good schedule, Arizona and then New York. But they are facing Atlanta. It is at home. And then Minnesota. So this is a really tough schedule going forward, but they've been getting special team points, and they've been getting turnovers. So they're a surprisingly good high-scoring defense right now. And then Pat goes with Deshaun Watson, drops Allen Hurns. Like I said, he was questionable. Deshaun Watson, stash for the future possibly. He had a 17-point game last week against Cincinnati. He's facing New England this week. So it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back in his second game. 17, good for a rookie quarterback. You definitely are always hoping for that quarterback position to be up around 20, and he's starting to flirt with that. So he's trending in the right direction. And then Scott picks up Chris Johnson, the perceived starting running back for Arizona this week. He will be facing Dallas, which got exposed last week against the Denver Broncos in what was an absolute massacre of their defense. And then Joe goes with Eric Ebron, picks him up, and drops LeGarrette Blount. And that just happened this morning. Eric Ebron, of course, finally caught that elusive touchdown this past week. And we'll see what happens this week as they face the Atlanta Falcons. So those were all the transactions that happened this week as of Wednesday morning. Wednesday morning up through the day. So a lot of stuff going on. No trades happened this past week. We've been a little light on the trade front. There have been lots of talks with teams falling to 0-2. People trying to buy from them early in the year, try and get them to sell, but it hasn't been happening thus far. So let's go ahead and let's look to week 3. Those were the news and notes. These were the transactions in our league. Let's go ahead and look at our week 3 matchup. Tonight's game, of course, we have the San Francisco 49ers against not the St. Louis Rams, but the Los Angeles Rams. I actually think the Niners are going to win this one. I'm feeling really good about this. Defense is looking good. Offense is starting to make some positive strides. I think they take this one. That is my prediction. I think it'll be something like 21-10 is what I'm guesstimating. Or it'll be a shootout, and it'll be a lot of fun. This is the kind of game, Thursday night games have been so bad. This is the kind of game that's going to surprise us and actually be quite entertaining and fun. So that's what I'm hoping for. So let's go ahead and look at week 3. We'll go ahead and start with my match since it's first. Braggadocious 1-1 against Fighting Sponges Matt Keyser with a 1-1 record, 7th overall against me, 0-2 record, 9th overall. Current projection is 120 to 110 in favor of Matt Kieser. He is favored. My whole realization that I've come to, I've been thinking about this the past few weeks, and I've come to the realization that if it's even to about 6 or 8 points, it's a coin flip, and then anything past that, I think you're favored. And then once you get into like 15 to 20 points, I'd start to say you're heavily favored. So definitely think that Kieser is favored in this matchup. Some of the big things will break down. He, of course, has Rob Gronkowski. Is he going to go? Reportedly practicing today. He's got the groin issue. If I have to guess, he's probably going to play. And then Jay Ajayi, like I said, is questionable in my lineup, but he will be fine. It was just more a precautionary thing. And then, of course, Jimmy Graham had to get moved to the bench because he is injured. And then I have Terrence West that's dealing with some soft tissue damage, and I don't think he's going to get much action the next few weeks. And if it is, it's probably going to be minimal. So let's go ahead and look at the big five. I'll do mine first. Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. Terrell Pryor Sr., Mike Evans, and Alshon Jeffrey are my wide receivers. Mark Ingram and Jay Ajayi are my quarterbacks. Matt Kieser has Drew Brees at quarterback, A.J. Green, Antonio Brown, Keenan Allen as his wide receivers, with Melvin Gordon and Le'Veon Bell as his running backs. I went and picked up Jack Doyle, like I said earlier. He's going up against Cleveland. Knowing my luck, he's probably going to get about 1.5 points. And then Rob Gronkowski is facing Houston. Our flex, I have Tyler Lockett at Tennessee, who I actually like a lot this week. Jimmy Graham being out, Jermaine Kearse has been traded. When he is that number 2 wide receiver, even by default, he gets a lot of looks, and I think he has some good big play potential, not just in receiving, but also in return game, and I think he's probably due for a very solid game. And then, of course, Martavis Bryant at Chicago on the road. Big game last week. And then our kickers, Justin Tucker and Matt Prater kickers, are kind of like a wash. And then I do have Carolina at home on New Orleans. I'm holding on to Carolina strictly because of the home and away splits are very real with New Orleans. Not very good on the road. I'm banking on that on a Carolina defense that's been very good. And then Houston at New England, I think, is going to be a fun one to watch, only because I feel like something has to give on either side. I think that New England is going to right the ship and start trending back in the direction that we expect them to trend. Monster game last week. We want to see them bring it together defensively. So that Houston matchup is going to be a lot of fun. And then some of the other significant matchups is the fact that Drew Brees is facing Carolina, and I have the Carolina defense. A.J. Green with the new offensive coordinator on the road in Green Bay. Antonio Brown on the road in Chicago. Same with Martavis Bryant. Chicago's been a pretty paper-thin defense, so you have to expect big things. The only thing is, can all three produce? Le'Veon Bell also facing Chicago, and then Melvin Gordon at home against Kansas City. I think that's going to be, and he definitely has the talent, and he's shown that he has the ability to score the points, even against a good defense like Kansas City. I think this one's going to come down to ball control. I could easily see this being a grinder of a game, something like 24-21 or 21-17, or it could be a shootout because both teams kind of have that. They have the firepower now, so that's going to be a fun one to watch too. And then a lot of my guys, are they finally going to be able to show up? Terrell Pryor at home against Oakland. Mike Evans, he showed up last week, of course, but has a tough matchup against Minnesota. And then Alshon Jeffrey facing New York. That's defense that was supposed to be good, and I still think they are good, but they haven't performed up to their potential. And I think a lot of that is because the offense has been so bad. And then Mark Ingram on the road at Carolina. I'm going to roll the dice with him, see if he can get anything going. And then Jay Ajayi at New York. I'm hoping for a monster game out of him there. So, on the bench, on the significant ones, is the fact that Ben Roethlisberger, who made some interesting comments about his role and what he wants to do this year on the offensive end, and that he's really focusing on winning games. So what does that mean? Does that mean he's not looking to throw as much? Are they just going to be a ball control offense? I don't know. I don't know what that means. but I think you should. No, don't start him. Don't do it. Don't do it. All right, so 120 to 110 is the projection in favor of Matt Keiser. I'm looking to get my first win. Keiser's looking to keep his winning streak, or not a winning streak, but get a winning streak going to move to 2-1. I'm looking to go to 1-2. Let's go to the next game. We have is Nate Silver Sith against Bake Bree. Projection 98 to 91 in favor of Elliott. This one is a coin flip. 1-1 against 0-2. Brienne, we'll start with her top 5 first. Carson Wentz at quarterback, who's been an absolute beast. Des Bryant, Cooper Kupp, and Mike Wallace are wide receivers. Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson has been pretty damn solid this year as a wide receiver running back. Those are her running backs. Big 5 for Elliott. Jay Cutler is his quarterback. Mike Crabtree. What's Thielen's first name? Is it Adam? Yeah, Adam Thielen. And then Jarvis Landry are his wide receivers. Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Stewart are his running backs. This is kind of cool. We have 2 running back tandems facing off against each other. Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson, and then Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Stewart. Tight end, Brienne has Kyle Rudolph, and then Jared Reed is going for Elliott. Jared Reed is questionable. Of course, he always has something going on, whether it's a foot or a shoulder or whatever. I don't think that's something you'd be too worried about. Same thing with Landry. Not serious knee stuff for Elliott's team. Some of the significant matchups is that you have Cutler going up against the Jets, and Cutler has been really good for the Miami offense, and he could have a really good game. Mike Crabtree at Washington. Interesting. Road game finally going cross country. How's that going to play out? And then Landry against Jets, you have to like that, especially if he's healthy. And then Thielen, who's been a solid wide receiver, blew up for 15 points week 1, only 2 points week 2. We'll see what happens against Tampa Bay at home. And then Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Stewart at home against New Orleans. You have to like the potential in that matchup. Carson Wentz against New York Football Giants. I think that he is poised for another big game. Des Bryant at Arizona. He's going to see a lot of Pat Pete, I think. But I think we see Dallas go back to the well that brought them so much success this past year or two and ride that offensive line, have a lot of ball control. Des Bryant will definitely see his red zone touches, but it's going to be interesting to see if he can get any type of separation from Pat Pete when he's working down in the red zone. Mike Wallace is always up for a big game, especially against Jacksonville. And then Cooper Kupp against San Francisco. It's going to be interesting to see who San Francisco takes away. They've done a good job against number 1 wide receiver so far this year. Do they consider Cooper Kupp the number 1? Do they consider Sammy Watkins? So this will be a fun one to watch too. And then we already talked about Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson at Indy. Indy, their defense, I can't really figure it out. They're not a good team, but their defense has actually been fairly decent, fairly solid. So I think you would have to give the edge with running backs to Elliott. I almost want to give the edge in terms of wide receivers to Brienne. And then I think that with Kyle Rudolph, I think that the 6.9 points, I almost feel like it should be flip-flop between Reed and Rudolph. I think that Rudolph is more poised for a double-digit game, but maybe not. Looking at the flex, Dante Moncrief for Brienne, White against Houston. James White, the pass-catching running back for the New England Patriots. Moncrief, is there anybody else that Brienne has that she could? I mean, when you look at it, you have Chris Hogan, who's still trying to work back. You have Cameron Brate, Robin Turbin, and Jeremy Hill on her bench. A little bit of a toss-up. The fact that Indy's at Cleveland, are they going to be able to move the ball a little bit more? And then White, you're just that's a coin flip. You're hoping that you have a touchdown come out of the New England backfield and you just happen to have the guy. And then defenses, Elliott's going with the LA Rams against San Francisco, and then Arizona against Dallas for Brienne, and then Tavecchio and Bryant are the respective kickers. Bryant's had a pretty good year this year, 12 and 14 points. another solid year. And then Tavecchio had the monster week, 19 points and 9 points respectively. A lot of kicker and defensive scoring going on right now. Elliott doesn't have he could have Thompson going, the Washington running back, Marquise Lee, who he just picked up at wide receiver. He also has Brandon Marshall and Austin Seferian-Jenkins on the bench. We'll see if anything changes come this Sunday. Let's look at the Belching Beavers against Golden Tate Warriors. 2-0 against 0-2. 115 to 99 is a projection total. Essentially, it's 110. Or, excuse me, 100. 99.96 is Marcos, the Belching Beavers projection. This is definitely favored for Matty Hughes. Let's look at his big five. Tom Brady against Houston at home, 23 projected points. His wide receivers are Amari Cooper, Golden Tate, Devontae Parker. Cooper and Parker, both questionable. Nothing serious, I would imagine, but you have to like the matchups. Cooper at Washington could be tough because who's going to get Norman? The DB play has been pretty solid there. And you have to imagine that maybe red zone Norman moves to Crabtree, and then outside the 20 he might be on Cooper. So that'll be that battle will be interesting to watch. And then Golden Tate's been a solid I almost said flex, but slot option in Detroit all year, looking very solid. And then Devontae Freeman and Ty Montgomery are the running backs. Devontae Freeman on the road in Detroit. He's been great all year. Ty Montgomery's been huge. And then, especially facing Cincinnati, you have to expect a big game out of him. The big five for Marcos, he has Mariota at home against Seattle. Good week one, 18.84 points. And then 14 points this past week. I think a lot of that was game flow. Only at 27 attempts, 15 completions, 1 touchdown. He didn't have to do a whole lot. And I think that's a big reason why. He might have to do a little bit more this week in Seattle. Brandon Cooks facing Houston. Will he be able to finally have that big game? He had 8 points and then 4 points respectively. He's been getting a lot of big targets downfield. Will he be able to get one in? And then, of course, T.Y. Hilton, who we all kind of advise against starting until Andrew Luck comes back. But it is Cleveland. I think they'll have an easier time moving the ball. They'll have more opportunities, so not a bad start. And then, of course, Doug Baldwin, the other wide receiver. Running backs are DeMarco Murray and Leonard Fournette. DeMarco Murray, it's a little bit scary because you don't really know what's going to be happening. You have to imagine that they're going to try and rest him. He could get a light workload, but I think they're going to try and rely on Derrick Henry, especially since this is going to be such a tough matchup against a hard-hitting defense. I think they're going to go with the young, fresh legs of Henry, and maybe if Murray does play, it might just be in a small sporadic role where they really monitor his touches and limit the toll on his body. But Fournette, heavy workload again against Baltimore. It's going to be a tough matchup, but the guy's going to get 20-plus touches every week, and it's going to be big. Look at the tight ends. Martellus Bennett for Matt Hughes and Zach Ertz for Marcos. Oh, how I miss you, Zach Ertz. He should have another great game. And then Martellus Bennett, with the injuries at wide receiver, he could be up for a good improvement against Cincinnati. And then the flex position, the Pierre Garçon and Lamar Miller. So Pierre Garçon for Marcos and Lamar Miller for Matty. Blair Walsh, Mason Crosby are the kickers. Pittsburgh defense and Seattle defense for Marcos. Of course, Greg Olsen, injured reserve from Marcos. He loses him for the rest of the season. And then you can make the argument maybe he might look to Joe Mixon or something. But I think Matt's pretty dialed in. He's definitely favored. Like I was saying, once you're in 15 points, you're getting in the favorite, heavily favored. And Matt should go to 3-0. Marcos will go to 0-3. That is my guesstimation, but it is fantasy football, and nothing can be set in stone. Let's move on to the number 1 ranked team, Fart Apocalypse. Robin is facing Scott of Sparty Party. The projection 119 to 83. I think it's safe to say that Robin is heavily favored. We will quickly go through the big 5 for this one. I don't think we need to break it down in much detail. Robin, Derek Carr, Julio Jones, Demarius Thomas. Sorry, I was looking ahead to Devontae Adams. And then LaShawn McCoy and Kareem Hunt are his big 5. Scott has Dak Prescott, Ted Ginn Jr., Nelson Aguilar, and Tyrell Williams as his wide receivers, with Samaje Perine and Austin Hooper and Theo Riddick making the running backs and tight ends. Hunter Henry will be Robin's tight end going up against Kansas City. C.J. Anderson is his flex. And then John Ross is Scott's flex. Gano in Baltimore round out Robin's team. Vinatieri in Detroit round out Scott's. There isn't much that Scott can do in terms of going to his bench for anything, unless he's feeling Chris Johnson, CJ2K down there in Arizona. What he would essentially hope for, massive bounce back game from Prescott, maybe a big play from Ted Ginn Jr. I mean, he has big playability with Ginn and Williams. Riddick could get a lot of... He gets his 700, 800 yards receiving every year, but we'll see what happens with Perine. Perine and Thompson with the timeshare against Oakland, not the best defense. He has a puncher's chance, but I'm still going with Robin. Let's move on to a team has no name against the Teabaggers. 1-1 in 8th place. Pat 2-0 to here in 3rd place. 110 to 93 is the projection total in favor of Tahir. Definitely would say that he is favored in this matchup. No coin flip here. If we break this one down, looking at the top 5 for Pat, he has Cam Newton as his quarterback, Deshaun Jackson, Galladay, and Higgins, who he just picked up just this past week, automatically inserted into the lineup, Rashard Higgins. And then, of course, the preseason wonder of Detroit, Kenny Galladay, who had a monster 19-point week 1 and then only 0.8 points week 2 against the New York Football Giants. Jacquizz Rodgers and Chris Carson are his running backs. You can just tell with Pat's team, this is obviously a rebuilding year. He's sold early and he has some good pieces, though. I have to say, I like what he has at Carson, and then Galladay and potentially Higgins there too. Abdullah makes up his flex spot, and then Delaney Walker at tight end, and then Boswell in Atlanta, kicker and special teams for Pat. Tahir, again, the heavily favored Tahir. Phillip Rivers at quarterback, Kelvin Benjamin, Tyreek Hill, and Randall Cobb are his wide receivers. Delvin Cook and Marshawn Lynch are his running backs. And then Travis Kelce at the tight end spot. And then J.J. Nelson, who blew up last week with 15 points, sitting there in his flex. 18 points, sitting in the flex. And then he has Lutz in Philadelphia rounding out his team. Let's go to our final matchup of the week. This one's a little bit more close. We have the 2-0 team of Joe against the 1-1 Yo Soy Fiesta by Tim. 113 to 104 is the current projection. This is, I would say, Joe's favored. Not quite a coin flip, but Joe's definitely favored. 9-point favorite. Matt Stafford for Joe's team at quarterback. Emmanuel Sanders, Odell Beckham, Jordy Nelson, wide receiver. Carlos Hyde and Todd Gurley are his running backs. Matt Ryan, Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, and Michael Thomas round out Tim's. Then Ezekiel Elliott and Telvin Coleman are his big 5. Tight end Flex, kicker, and defense for Joe. Eric Ebron, Stephon Diggs, Goskowski in Denver. Jason Witten, Crowder, Bailey, Minnesota for Tim. So let's go ahead and break this one down a little bit more. Big thing for Joe, he has 2 running backs going tonight. He has Carlos Hyde. He has Todd Gurley. This could make or break the matchup. Carlos Hyde has looked great the past few weeks. It is a home game. Todd Gurley has also looked great the past few weeks. Do they both have good games? Will one perform well and not the other? I think that'll be a lot of fun. I think if anybody's probably due for a little bit of a wake-up call, it might be Gurley, because this is a very good San Francisco defense. I don't think they're going to give up a lot to him. I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, trying to make him get the ball out early. And this is a defense that does historically really, really well against number 1 running backs. And I think if anybody were to have a bad game, it would probably be Todd Gurley. And until the passing game gets going for San Francisco, I think they're going to rely heavily on Carlos Hyde. So if I had to guess, I would say Carlos Hyde has a good game, Gurley the bad game. But these are 2 notoriously bad teams facing off on a Thursday night, in which the game plan is typically simplified, and they like to run the ball, so they could just both have monster games. Odell Beckham, ankle issue. There's no way in heck, regardless of what happens, you don't start him, because he's only going to get better each week. Jordy Nelson, you have to be a little bit worried about the leg issues, because he's not a spring chicken anymore, but you have to run him out there every week, especially against Cincinnati. And then Emmanuel Sanders with the monster week 2 performance, 18 points, 2 touchdowns, 62 yards, only a 2.6 the week before. Emmanuel Sanders looked really good, and then he's facing Buffalo, finally going across country out to the cold, cold New York, Buffalo area. Matt Stafford, I think he's pretty solid. He's been pretty safe, and he's shown that the past few years. Atlanta, this could be one of those games where it's pretty methodical, and then both teams ramp it up in the fourth quarter. I don't think either one of them is going to really run away with it. I think it's going to be fairly even, and I think that his projected total is probably about right at 19. Matt Ryan facing Detroit on the road. The offense is so versatile, and Detroit's been a really good defense. But I think that this is going to be the true test of the Detroit defense and what they're able to dictate against the Falcons. That the Falcons definitely have a chip on their shoulder, and the game flow is what I'm really interested in. And it is inside a dome. Both teams play really fast inside of domes. And I think it's fair to say that it's fairly even between Stafford and Ryan. Stafford's definitely been more of a game manager, but I think if you had to say if anybody has more potential for a big breakout game, it would probably be Matt Ryan. And then Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, when you look at these wide receivers, you can look at J.J. Nelson and say J.J. Nelson has finally emerged as the number 1 guy. But when you look at Larry Fitzgerald, he's still getting a ton of targets. And so just by volume alone, you have to like that, especially against Dallas. They're going to try and keep that offense off the field, keep things moving, and I think you're going to get a lot of Larry Fitzgerald. DeAndre Hopkins, we'll see what happens. He's still getting a lot of targets. The good thing is that this year he's actually getting receptions, because at least the quarterback play is competent enough that he can throw the ball in the vicinity in which he can catch it. So you're seeing actually his projections have been going up slowly each week. And even though it's on the road at New England, I still think that there's still good opportunity for Houston there. I know that Matt and I think Matt's probably the only other person that has a piece of the Houston offense, Matt Hughes, in terms of anybody that's really startable. So that's going to be a fun one to watch. And then Thomas, New Orleans at Carolina on the road. That's going to be a tough matchup. I mean, it should be anyway. Who knows? But Ezekiel Elliott at Arizona, I think this is going to be the revenge game. And I think if there's anybody you need to be worried about, it would be Ezekiel Elliott, who was non-existent last week and was not happy about his involvement. And I think this is going to be one of those 25 carry, maybe even catch a few pass performances. And I think if there's anybody Joe would have to be worried about, I think Ezekiel Elliott would be the one. And then Tevin Coleman has been pretty good this year as that number 2 running back. Not getting a lot of kind of a fairly balanced with carries and receptions. Had a 10-point game last week against Green Bay, 6-point game against Chicago. And it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize the running backs this week against Detroit. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I'm excited for that game. And then Jason Witten, the surprise tight end this year. 12 points and then 16 points last week. He's been an absolute beast. Tim picked him up off the not the waiver wire, but off of free agency, and has been a fun kind of story. The old man is still kicking it, and there's no reason to think that he won't be involved this week. But Arizona has been really good against tight ends. They continue to be. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens when you look at Des Bryant and you have this offensive line and you have Zeke and Dak Prescott. You have to think there's going to be a time or two where Jason Witten gets open, because Arizona hasn't quite faced an offense like this. This is going to be very telling for, I think, the future of Arizona and what they're going to be able to do. Can they keep the offense off the field? And then can their offense put together a couple of drives to help out the defense? This is going to be a lot of fun to watch, too, on Monday night. And then Jamison Crowder, of course, against Oakland is kind of, he hasn't been that great this year. Maybe something happens. And then in terms of Diggs, I think Joe having Diggs going against Tampa Bay, the monster week 1 against New Orleans, and was it the fact that it was just against New Orleans and they faced Pittsburgh, and then Pittsburgh was able to shut them down, or is it just the fact that they're missing Sam Bradford, which is so crazy to hear? I think we'll get a better idea of what Diggs will look like in this offense this week if Sam Bradford doesn't play. And depending on how this game goes, for me personally, it would make me either get excited about him or start to shy away from him a little bit until Bradford comes back. And then Eric Ebron, he caught his touchdown last week. They're going to be moving the ball, I think. I actually think there's a good chance he, maybe got the monkey off the bat and is going to see a couple red zone targets. But this Detroit offense, they don't really key in on any one person. They'll move it all around the field to all types of different people. They're definitely one of those offenses where they just are trying to move the ball and score points, and they don't really force feed any one target. So Ebron is going to have a shot, definitely. Looking at the benches, Jalen Richard, probably the only one that you would maybe consider starting, maybe. And then Joe has Frank Gore going up against Cleveland. And then I guess that would probably be the only other one that you would look at. Thomas Rawls is definitely in a type of a timeshare right now while he's trying to get back and be healthy. But I think when you look at these two rosters, you would probably only look at Jalen Richard for Tim and then Frank Gore for Joe. So that is week 3. A couple of good close matchups. a couple of potential blowouts. But definitely going to be watching, me and Keezer. There's some opportunity there for me, possibly. Joe and Brienne, Elliot and Brienne, very close right now. And then you look at Joe and Tim, also pretty darn close. Joe favored in that one. The other two, I think, are probably going to be the most competitive games this week. And then you have, of course, the blowouts that are going to happen. But that is week 3. Ready for Thursday Night Football. Should be a lot of fun. We weren't able to do, Scott and Pat did not do their projections, but we will have them next week. I think we're going to have Pat on next Thursday to do our Patty projections and talk about week 4. And then, of course, as always, next Tuesday, we will be doing our recap of week 3. And we'll go through all of the shenanigans and goings on. We have a couple drink bets going on for this week. I have a bet with Elliot that I think that Antonio Brown and Brandon Marshall will score touchdowns this week. And then we also have a couple other drink bets that we'll go into in terms of weekly matchups that we had. We have a couple season-long ones, and I think we'll talk about those next week too. We won't dive into all of them too much, but a couple involving Scott. I'm in on a few of them, and then there were a few others as well. But we'll recap those on Tuesday when we recap week 3. We'll do we'll update everybody on where we are on drink bets for the year. That way we can keep everything on track and maybe do one or two. Well, I think that's going to do it for this show. Short and sweet. It should be a lot of fun. Thursday Night Football, week 3. Hope everybody's having a good year so far. Me, not so much. Yahoo still thinks that I'm going to bounce back and be like 9-7 or something, or 8-6. We'll see. I'm still banking on 0-5 to start the year. All right, you guys, this is the Dynasty. I'm Peter Livingston. Shoot me a message on the Twitter at Peter Livingston or an email at ffdynastypod@gmail.com. It's been fun. I got over my week 2 loss. I'm already looking forward to week 3. We'll see what happens. Best of luck to everybody. Go 49ers. I think they're going to get this one. They're going to get that first win of the season. I'm excited for tonight's game. I'll do a drink bet for myself. Niners Rams straight up. I got the Niners. If not, I'll chug a beer on our next show. All right, everybody. Have a good one.